All right, so we simplified the title. Today I'm going to talk about our Lake Erie walleye telemetry tool. Had an awesome project team to work with on this. Everyone listed there: Brian Locke, director, Dr. Vandergoot, Dr. Nancy Nate, Jeff Tyson, and certainly more than that. But this all arose from an LEC identified need. And one thing I did learn pretty quick, even though this project team was high powered, we were really bad at naming the project, because I think we confused it with the project summary or maybe the abstract. So the actual project was effective dissemination of Lake Erie walleye movement and distribution information for use by managers. Couldn't use that as a title slide, but did want to show it. So I'm going to go quickly through some background, talk a little bit about the data preparation that it took us to get here. Show you the tool. Ted, I was not bold enough to do this live, so they are screen captures, and then I'll summarize at the end. So jumping into the background, certainly this crowd, I don't need to explain the Lake Erie walleye fishery too in depth. It kind of hit me that we're a 20 million pound fishery in the best years, and those best years are since the late 70s. So we're not talking about how it was so great in the early 1900s. This is an incredible walleye fishery. It continues to be both commercially and sport. But if you're like me and I can't visualize 20 million pounds of fish, that's not, my mind isn't capable of that. So if you're more of a numbers guy and in a more traditional sense in walleye task group harvest summaries, in the best years we're approaching a 10 million fish fishery. So I think it's pretty clear to say Lake Erie is an important walleye fishery, and culturally, I don't think anything defines that better than the fact that in Port Clinton, Ohio, we drop a 25-foot walleye from the sky on New Year's Eve. So with all due respect to Mille Lacs and Lake of the Woods and Lake Winnipeg, I do feel comfortable saying we're the walleye capital of the world, even though I know that that's a debate in some circles. But along with that, of course, comes complexities of management. We have two countries, a province and 4 states. We have large and strong sport and commercial fishery harvest. So it certainly is a management challenge in many ways. So why this project? Why did we go to the Science Transfer Board and request a project? In a GLaDOS Lake Erie walleye project sense, there were lots of walleye projects. Walleye were a core of some of the early GLaDOS work, and this became cumulative and started building across the years on Lake Erie. There were numerous project leaders. Obviously, it wasn't just one person that was individually leading all of these walleye projects. And there were project-specific sources of fish for each project, different basins of stocking, different stocks of fish within the basins. And each project was different, obviously, different numbers of fish, different amount of years. And to kind of summarize that, at the time we were discussing this, there were 6 GLaDOS Lake Erie walleye projects. Each one was somewhere from 2 to 6 years of tagging, so each project was different. 2,340 walleye had been tagged cumulatively by those projects, with anywhere from 233 to 616 per project. And the battery life differed based on tag size and specifications, so 3 to 5 years or more of battery life per each fish. No single project, could tell the whole Lake Erie walleye migration story. And for managers, that's important, right? Like, we learn a lot from each project. Each project has specific objectives. But even with the GLaDOS infrastructure and database, we could only look at these results one project at a time. So the goal was to combine information across these projects to address high-level information, and again, for managers. So that's important. We aren't analyzing these data to calculate the natural mortality rate of walleye. We're not doing science work with these results. We just wanted to summarize what does movement look like with this growing data set that we have of walleye detections. So we decided to build a dynamic web tool that we could use to summarize all of these detections, and also wanted to be able to account for future detections. So this wasn't a static effort with the detections that existed at that time. This was intended to incorporate a building data set. So this is the cool part, and Dr. Vandergoot and his staff certainly wrestled with this one and did an amazing job. But first they had to build code to extract detection data from all these projects from the GLaDOS database. And I'm very proud to say that the first step was filtering down to 49 million rows of data. So this included false detections and things like that. But then, the most important step was making that usable. So those 49 million rows were summarized down to about 700,000 rows of unique fish per day per location. So if you assume a receiver as a location, we summarize the unique number of fish on that receiver each day. So that gave us a workable database of 700,000 rows, which is really pretty impressive. And you think about those data, they aren't just a data point. There's space and time included there. These are very Lake Erie walleye move, and we have lots of receivers, so a lot of depth, I'll say, to this data set. We had an important LEC meeting in February of 21 where we narrowed down some of this work, and we really wanted to come up with seasons that were ecologically important to us as managers. We defined what winter, spring, summer, and fall look like in our minds relative to these detections. And then we also had to define basins to kind of simplify how we wanted to summarize. So all of those points correspond to Lake Erie walleye tags that were detected in those areas, but the colors are representative of the basins that we defined. So keep that in mind. We have seasons and we have basins. But even with 700,000 data points, we had to look at, initially, are there enough to summarize the way we want to summarize them? So there are enough annually. Well, with 89 unique fish in the lowest year, so early on when we first started tagging walleye, we had some years under 100 walleye, but in the best years, over 1,000 walleye. Obviously we had enough walleye annually to move forward, so that certainly passed the test. But how do the seasons look? Well, the first step we took was looking at a summary by month, and when you realized across the project time frame that the least detections were in February at 23,000 detections, we were probably okay. So we felt good with our seasons. So what does the tool look like? Again, these are screen captures. We aren't live, but I think they'll represent it well. When you log in, you see a base map that your results are going to be showing on in the main panel, and then there's a very intuitive, and I'll even say, even for managers, intuitive panel to sort through the data. And when you look at that panel, you're basically looking at the basin of fish that you want to summarize, the months, and then the year and the seasons. And you have options, so there are different background maps to choose from. You can either do a heat map or a bubble map, and I'll show you those, what those mean, and then you can work with the details of the colors and the size of the bubbles and all those details. And the best thing about this is it's not very limiting. So you can choose a single spawning basin if you want fish only from the eastern basin or western basin, or the group of fish that aren't characterized. You can choose either of those individually, or you can pick multiple. So if you want to look at both eastern and western basin fish, or even just all fish by selecting all three. So you click through the menu, you determine what you want to look at on the map, and then here's what the result looks like. Now, I don't have the receiver locations displayed on this one. I think it makes for a cleaner image, but you can click the button and turn on all the receiver locations. This is a heat map. It's doing interpolating between receiver points. But as you might imagine, the hottest, the brightest red colors represent the most fish. So I'm going to walk through 4 seasons. This is 2019, which is a high detection year for us, so it's 1 year of data. It's Western Basin spawning fish, and we're going to walk through each season. So this is spring. Surprise, surprise, right? Most Western Basin spawning fish are in the Western Basin on the reefs in the spring, although you see right away that not all of them are there. Most, but not all. You go to the summer, you see exactly what you might expect. Fish migrating east using the Central Basin, making it as far as Jason's waters down in New York and and Ontario waters up north, so really spreading out across the lake. And then in the fall, they start moving back towards the west. They don't need to be at the spawning grounds yet, but they're starting to make their way back. And then in the winter and immediately leading up to spawning, there you see them all back, ready to go for the next spawning season. But you think about what went into this. This is 6 Lake Erie projects. This is lots of detections. This is something we couldn't do without me going to a staff member and saying, hey, is there any way we could grab a bunch of project data and put it together and summarize it and make images? So I think this is really amazing how simple this tool is to use, but the power that it has. And it can lead to graphics like this for a stakeholder presentation. If I'm going to go out to a local fishing club and talk about the Lake Erie walleye fishery, I can grab a few images from the tool and put something together like this that in a clockwise direction kind of shows annual migration of walleye, specific to that year, but likely very indicative of most years. So the other option is if you don't want interpolation and if you want to look at more of a raw data summary or raw data view of the summary, each of those dots is one of the receiver locations, and it's color coded to match the proportion of detections. So this is actually, this isn't the same year, but it's a similar, it's 1 year, 1 season worth of fish, but you can look at exactly how many of those or what proportion of those fish were on each receiver without the interpolation and the heat map. So also very useful. You can change the size of those dots to make them stand out more or to refine them a little more. It has a lot of utility. In addition to that, if you don't like our graphics, if you don't like the way it interpolates or don't like the image options, you can just look at the simple bar graph of basin proportions and you can get the whole data table, so that just below those bar graphs is the top of the data table that is all the summarized data that you can export, put in your own software or analysis program and map it however you would like to. So certainly very flexible in that regard. But I'm still not going to a staff member and asking them to do this, right? Like I'm clicking a few buttons, I'm getting it, and I'm not using a staff member's time for a whole day to get these answers. So with that, in summary, I think the tool really magnifies the value of GLaDOS. I mean, the infrastructure, the data storing capacity and all that is obviously still there, and we do a lot of great individual research projects, but this just magnifies that value and lets us look across projects on Lake Erie in a way that we couldn't before. And it really does distill down large data sets for managers, and like I said, it's easy enough for a manager to use, so it's awesome. And it really does simplify our knowledge transfer to users. That I can make graphics with this that are meaningful and that fishers or other people will understand when they see it. And as I've mentioned more than once, reduces our staff time to create things like this. I don't know that Dr. Vandergoot wants to see this or think about this much, but it's certainly a pilot. All the time and effort that went into understanding how to do this and put it together, it's sitting there for other species or other lakes or species-lake combinations. So we've kind of done the groundwork for situations that might make sense for in the future. And just to close out, that it summarizes a lot of projects to tell a story, which is really the intent of it. It's truly robust, broad-scale summaries when you think about the number of detections that go into this tool, and it absolutely has met our needs, in my opinion. So with that, I think I stayed ahead of schedule, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or we could go across the hall eventually and I can answer them there. I certainly want to thank the whole team.